woke. Take off your shades, it helps see through the smoke. Cause the wicked hide behind the cloak. And if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog. What's real, what ain't? Is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Speeding the facts.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hair of the Dog. I'm Andy Kennedy, and it is Friday. As my co-host likes to say, it's Fuck It Friday. And what's better on Fuck It Friday than talking about rich people losing money? Now, we're not going to talk for the entire hour about what's happening currently in the stock market, because despite the fact that Melvin Capital has lost $2.75 billion in capital, the only thing bigger than that is the number of analyses that have been made about what's going on. So, you know, we'll touch on it briefly and kind of talk a little bit about it. And but we've got other things to talk about too. And we are also very excited that we have a special guest with us this morning, right? That somebody actually likes us enough to come on the show, which is amazing, right? So, Carrie Barber, how the hell are you this morning?
I'm good. I've survived to fight another day. So yeah, on the whole Wall Street thing, first, here's my take on it. My disclaimer, I do not have a license in securities, so I cannot give you advice, but I will say this, brothers and sisters, hold the line. Hold the line. And I actually love everything that's going on from this perspective, right? We have talked about a general strike. And the pushback on the strike is a real issue, because if I am a striking worker and I am a paycheck or less away from catastrophe and I can't feed my kids, the strike becomes problematic. So what actually happened over the last week bypassed some of the angst that workers feel and took it straight to the oligarch and these ultra shady capitalists and the hedge funds. So I personally love that piece of it. And I saw all these op-eds coming out, particularly from the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and all of this, where they're like, oh my God, your 401k. And once again, I can't give you financial advice, but if your 401k is so heavily weighted into an aggressive model that you have all these hedges in there, today may be a good day to diversify. So talk to your 401k.
Yes, reevaluation is the word of the day.
Right. So maybe you go to something a little more conservative just for a little bit while all of this is happening, right? So so this is why I personally love it, because it takes the weight off the family, or, you know, the frontline worker who's already been through so much. We're not asking them to go in the street or stop trying to get a paycheck. All we're saying is, if you have, you know, $1.50 to invest in something, maybe you do that and then you just hold on to it. Don't do anything. That has got to be the easiest thing in the world. Do nothing. Just hold. Be patient. And just watch these headlines roll in, because that's what I'm doing.
Exactly. Right? People don't realize that you're much better off in the long term to make money. Right? It's the greedy people that try to predict the daily ups and downs of the market that typically get burned more times than they don't, because the house always wins, right? Like, I mean, this is no different than any other casino. And we've got to realize that, right? It's a staircase up. The stock market is a staircase upward, right? It goes up and down a little bit, back and forth, but it is going always in the same direction, up. And if you stay in it for the long run, you will eventually get your payoff, right? But it's patience. It's doing your due diligence and looking into it and being patient. And I like do you mind, Carrie, if I share the analogy that I shared in our chat this morning?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so basically this is my critique of what just happened, okay? Wall Street is driving down the highway, doing 90 miles an hour in a 60. Okay. This young guy in a Honda Civic passes Wall Street doing 100. And Wall Street screams, we must lower the speed limit to 50.
Right, exactly. And you know, so it's just amazing to me that everything that we've seen through this pandemic and COVID, and in the backdrop of this, you have Congress saying, well, first you had Biden say, we're going to give you 2,000, day one, 2,000, if you will, but just help Georgia win. And then Georgia, you know, the two Democrats, they did what they did. And now we're, oh, well, we can't give you 2,000. We're going to give you 1,400 because you already got 600 from Trump. So we can't possibly go over a 2,000 mark. And, oh, by the way, we're not going to do it till March. So that is how funding works for us, right? In this global crisis, that's how it works for us. We get crumbs and we have to beg for it and we have to fight for it. But if you're a hedge fund who has potentially lost millions of dollars, it is nothing for you to go to your neighbor hedge fundee, or in this case, Citadel, and ask for more money so that you can get another loan on top of the money that you got from somebody else. And I'm trying to think, like, if I had a family member who had a gambling problem and they came to me and said, hey, I just lost $5,000 at the casino. Can you give me another $3,000 so that I can borrow 5 more from the house? That's crazy. No. And we're going to get you some counseling, right? If we can afford that. But in the hedge fund world, that's not a problem. And the money that the transaction total that we saw bubble up over the last few days was enough to pay for college for every American for the next, 4 or 5 years, right? Yeah. And just poof, gone. But yet we have to beg for 1,400. And I gotta say, the rest of the world is like, what the hell? And I purposely wore my old Medicare for All shirt today. You can tell it's well loved, because behind all of this pandemic, we still don't have health care. And there was this whole fight with force the vote and everything else. And I've been screaming on social media in my quiet little corner, when we talked about PAYGO and all of these things, how none of that is true. And the world that these hedge fund people live in, none of it is true. The only people who are living in a solid reality are us, those of us who either can't work, have to go to work, or retired from work. We're the only ones who are living in solid reality. The rest of them are in this world of their own making, right? And we're seeing the consequence of a full-on dirty masses incursion into that fantasy world, and I am loving every moment of it. Absolutely.
Well, it's amazing, right? And I agree with you completely. It's starting to show a wider audience of people outside of just the people that invest, or on as a hobby, or as a life, or for a living, right? That the Wall Street description is of fraud, right? That we are starting to understand that, and this is all part and parcel. When we were talking about this earlier with the with the great financial crisis in 2008. And basically what that did was, and without getting into the gist of it, right, a lot of people did a lot of horrible things, a lot of illegal things. And the vehicle is there to make these people pay and to make the changes so that our society can start to transition to a more just society, right? The Obama administration, when they came in, they were bought and paid for already. They decided to do nothing. And so all of those people got bailed out, and nothing happened. And what that did was it told the world that the business model is fraud, and you won't have to pay that penalty. And Wall Street has been doing this forever, and they still, all of the stuff that they do, right, with the mortgage-backed securities, that messed everything up in 2008, right, and what's currently happening in the stock market, and which is happening all over the place with CEOs getting these huge bailout packages, and they turn around and they do stock buybacks, right, in order to enrich themselves. This is a model of fraud. If you wonder why this is all happening, it's because of nobody ever gets in trouble for it, right? And that's the key. So I'm thinking if we can get enough people to understand this and know this, it might be time for an intervention.
Right, maybe, and I do feel a little vindicated because all of the things that we've been talking about here, here you go. Here's the example. And so I really appreciate that this is happening on so many levels. And then I do want to give a quick shout out to, we have a badass economist watching this morning, Ms. Sherry Weiss. So good morning, Sherry. Thank you so much for joining us. And feel free to weigh in and correct us on anything that we happen to get wrong here. And then for everyone who's tuning in for the first time, welcome, come on in. So we welcome people from all across the political spectrum, whatever you think, come on in and share your opinion and make it a good one. Bring your A game because we will tear it up if you're bullshit. So just know that, especially on a Friday. So let's introduce our guest. This is a friend of the show who's been on before to talk about technology because that's kind of his background, but it totally applies to this conversation about Wall Street and currency. And as we get into censorship, we're going to take it in an entirely different direction, one that I have not seen anyone tackle censorship and free speech from this perspective before. So hopefully this is going to be a good show. So Mike Toller, good morning. How are you, Mr. Toller?
For the record, whatever it was, I didn't do it. Nobody saw me do it. You can't prove a thing.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bart Simpson.
Pretty much. So let me paint the picture of the setup. So in an earlier episode, I had made a comment about free speech and how that would work. And I mentioned that, with everything going on with the clickbaity people that I'm not even going to mention and their free speech arguments, I came up with a simple answer that is maybe not the right one, which I was like, make it a public utility, meaning the internet. Well, that still doesn't cover the channels on the internet like Facebook and Twitter and all of these other things. And I immediately got a pushback from Mike, who has very different ideas and a different take on what that censorship would look like. So rather than having this argument offline, I said, Mike, come on and let's talk through it. So sorry, here we are, Mike, free speech, and we're journalists. And you and I had this exchange before. We have one journalist, Rome Bethia, who is constantly getting kicked off of Twitter, not necessarily because of anything he says, but because other people are reporting him. So you have like the K-hop people like to target him and just do this flood of reporting his account, and then he gets shut down. But he's a journalist that's supposed to be in a protected class, right? So this is part of where I'm coming from. And you had a very decidedly different take on what free speech and censorship really looks like. So,
well, ultimately, I think that it comes down to net neutrality is key, no matter what, because net neutrality will ensure that your internet service provider or your ISP cannot alter or restrict you from accessing this site or that site or putting this or that up. They can't get in the way of what comes down the pipe. It makes sure that pipe, that connection is open. But when it comes to things like Facebook and Twitter and Amazon Web Services and all these other things, that's their house. They get to decide who gets to play in their house. And unless you want to take those companies and turn them into public companies, wholly owned by the government, there's no way to force them to amplify your.
Okay. So when we have someone like the seditionist Senator Hawley, which to me is just a ridiculous example. So you have Senator Hawley, who should be removed from office, in my opinion, and many other opinion, based on Constitution. He's out there crying because he lost a private contract for a book deal, and he's crying in an op-ed published by the New York Times about censorship and free speech. To me, that whole, just that one sentence alone, the irony of that. He's obviously not being censored. He has a platform and a showcase that the average person wouldn't get. It wouldn't matter how right I was in my op-ed, the New York Times is not going to publish it, but they will for Howley, right? So what are we actually talking about with free speech in your mind?
Well, as long as there is an avenue, as long as you're not being stopped from getting your message out there entirely, then that's where we, if that was the case, it's like Trumpty Dumpty going forth and going, no, Twitter's censoring me, but he can walk down at any time to the press room and have every camera and every reporter there amplify his message. He has methods by which he can still exercise his free speech, right? And when it comes to Facebook and Twitter and all of those are a platform, and they can choose what to be on that platform. And that's their right as a private corporation to decide who they want and do not want to do business with, right? So it's entirely possible for you to spin up your own web server or your own website, find someone that is willing to host your message if you can't, if you don't have the knowledge to spin it up, and do your own thing. Yes, it will be more difficult. Yes, there is costs. But I mean, even going all the way back to the printing press, there was costs involved in buying your own printing press. And just because somebody owned a printing press doesn't mean that they had to they had to print what you requested of them.
Okay, so in that example, I sent you the link to the article about the World Socialist website on Facebook. Facebook not only shut them down, but disabled the accounts of the administrators who happen to be professors, one of law and things like this. So that, based on what you just said, that's okay?
Yeah, that's Facebook's prerogative on their environment, right? They can shut down and decide that they don't want to do business with those individuals, or have the ability to post things onto Facebook's website. That's even though you don't pay for Facebook, I mean, anything you don't pay for, you're obviously the product, they're selling your data, but they're still doing business with you in a sense. And more than in a sense, they are doing business with you.
Well, I want to push back on that phrase just a little bit, Andy. I'm sorry. When we always say that if you're not buying the product, you are the product, I got to tell you, even if you're buying the product, your data is being used. So
that's true. It's just more rampant when it's a free service, right?
Right, exactly. Like, I look at it this way. Let's say that you are employed by a large enough firm that they have their own intranet, right? That they have their own platform that they host on their own servers, where the daily business of that firm runs on back and forth for the communication, for whatever they're doing, right? They have their own rules as what you can and can't do on that intranet, right? Where you can go online, what you can use it for, and the penalty a lot of times for breaking those rules right off the bat is you lose your job, right? How is a place like Twitter or Facebook any different than that, except that it's basically open to everybody?
Exactly. I mean, if you're sitting at work, going on Pornhub, looking up all sorts of things you shouldn't be doing during your time when you're supposed to be working, you're gonna get fired. We're gonna find you. We're gonna see it, and you're gonna get fired. So that's and we being the IT department, right? So
and getting a visit from HR.
Yeah.
Right. As you walked out the door. No, that's totally true, because I've worked for companies where when healthcare costs were starting to rise, they could mandate what your behavior was, not only in the workplace, but at home. So I remember when the policy came out that you could not smoke. You had to quit smoking, and they were going to test you. And this now infringed upon your behavior at home, in your private areas, and people rebelled at it, but companies said, yeah, but we can do this, and this is what we're going to do. So there is these, like you said, the printing press, there's a cost to doing business, and I think that people still get confused that free speech, when we use the term free speech, that is only between me and my government. That has nothing to do with the marketplace or anything else. So, and I think, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you brought up this point. The same people who are crying about free speech were the same ones who said that the baker doesn't need to make a cake for the gay wedding, right? So it's disingenuous at its core.
Right. So, I mean, either you want to, if you want Facebook to be forced to have your message, then Joe's Bakery down the street has to make that cake. It's part and parcel. So, and we have there's an old saying in the kind of free, freeware community. Free is in beer, not as in speech. There's always that definition, and a lot of people don't seem to hear the word free and think it's free as in beer, but not as in speech. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. So real quick, Mike, Ellie says hi. So
hello,
she jumped in this morning. And then we have a new person joining us. So this is Randy Toller from Seffner, Florida. I'm not sure if I'm saying that properly. Seffner, Florida. He's a USA Green Party founder and a presidential candidate for 2024. And he says, keep up the good work. So welcome, Randy. Appreciate you joining us this morning. And just a reminder to anyone else. Oh, Dave as well. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Dave.
We can't forget Dave.
Yeah, it's Dave. It's Dave. Everybody knows it's Dave. I gotta find that song from the Kids in the Hall. These are the Daves I know.
I have it. I'll send it to you.
Thank you. So welcome everybody, and please feel free to join this conversation. So, all right, let's get into hate speech. This is probably my absolute favorite topic because Dave says, whatever, man. Thank you, Dave.
Dave's not here, man.
Right. So one of my favorite things about being a person with a strong religious background, right? Now, I'm not one of those who's going to impose it on you, but what I was taught from an early age is this phrase that I believe has borne out over my adult life. You never need to defend the truth. You just need to let it out, right? So when it comes to this whole argument about we need to curtail hate speech and we need to rein in social media, and then one of our guests on a prior show on the DLF interview with Brandon, he said something, this was Nick, he said something that I was like, God, that's perfect. He said the cure for fascism is progressive policy. And I truly believe that because it brings not only a fiscal responsibility, but a social responsibility into one policy platform. So I have no personal fear about speaking to white supremacists or fascists or whatever, because what we're offering, once they hear it in an honest way and get the conversation going, I have never had a fascist, white supremacist, somebody on the far right say, no, I don't agree with that. Never. So I personally am all for let them have their platform, let them have all of these things. What's your take on it, Mike?
I'm very much a free speech absolutist. I'd rather have Nazis marching in the street than hiding in the shadows, plotting and planning, because when they're marching in the street, I can see them. I know who they are. Look, it worked really well for the Capitol insurrection, didn't it? Everybody's face showed up and they were found. Yeah, except the 147 members who are sitting in the Capitol right now. What's going on there? Not sure, but yeah, you're right. So when we had the
basest hack of Parlay ever. Just a little bot scraped up information. Now I know who in my neighborhood was participating in Parlay and what they actually posted. Were they just chatting, or were they putting in hostile, bloodthirsty messages? Yeah, those are things I want to know. And back when Obama was first elected, 2008, you remember those bumper stickers that had the misspelling? Obama, big mistake. I love those as a PSA so that I would put more distance between my car and theirs, right? Obviously, this is somebody who can't spell and probably isn't following the road rules. So I loved it from that perspective. But yeah, I don't know. So what is your take on the left calling for reining these people in? Like AOC actually said it.
AOC has always been kind of a half and half with me. I have never been, I like what she wants to do. I've never been a fan of how she goes about some of the things. But it's the same thing. We don't need to be restricting people, going, hey, you can't say this, you can't say that, you can't, especially from a government position. Going at it like that, because that does fly in the face of the freeze peaches, right? The freeze peaches, I love it. So Dave actually brings up a good point, and it kind of goes back to the allyship. We opened talking about what was going on Wall Street, and what I'm seeing from the neoliberals, the neocons, is, oh my God, bad, and you're working with white supremacists, and this is really a Republican thing. And no, this is people from all across the political spectrum who have joined together with their little $1.45 to invest in stock. And so Dave says when populism rises, it can rise on the right and left. And I think I would take it a step further. Populism rises on the right and the left. And these are things that we can all agree on, right? So we saw that when Trump got elected, most people were about the populist message, not necessarily about the white supremacy. I think that those people just latched on and hooked their wagon to it and rose that, kind of rode with it. But so, Mike, let's get back to this free speech thing. You talked about the solution. And from an IT perspective, I got to say, if all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. You said we're supposed to spin up a server? What? Yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible, and especially for a small server, it doesn't take much more than a desktop. And most of it's free software. The only issue that you run into is right now with your internet service provider, a residential connection generally is forbidden by the terms of service from running your own server from your house. You're not going to have a static IP address, so you're going to need to use something to like a distributed DDNS or distributed DNS in order to have that running, and you'll be running afoul of your terms of service, which is where that net neutrality comes in, and making sure that pipe is treated. You can run a server, or you can download and watch Netflix, whichever you want to do. That's where that net neutrality comes in, having the ISP step out of metering or dealing with that content and saying what you can and cannot do, and just being a pipe to the internet. Because that's where that real censorship is going to come in. Because if we lose the ability to host our own content onto the internet without the use of Twitter, Facebook, Amazon, whatever corporation is in control right now, then we truly are under the control of those corporations. The free and wild internet that is what allows us to utilize that without the fear of censorship, right?
Okay, so explain that in terms that we understand here. Like, we're a small media company, and we've seen other independent media companies, journalists and things like that, like Status Quo, actually have their own platform diminish by the providers, right? So like, we cannot advertise on Facebook. We can't boost our posts. We can't do any of that because we're talking about social issues and politics. Facebook doesn't like it. But if I boost an ad about our merchandise where they get a cut, they're all for it. So when it comes to advertising, the largest advertising vehicle that I have at my disposal is Google. on Google Ads, because that is where the marketplace goes. Most people are using Google, and Google has its own play space. So how free am I, even if I spin up my own server? Like, we have our own website, we've got it backed up, we've got a great host who's doing wonderful things for us. I have no fear that we're going to get shut down on our website. But drawing in eyeballs, otherwise Andy and I are just shouting to the dark, and we lose our tens of followers. So.
Those poor bastards.
Right.
That is kind of the crux of the matter, though, isn't it? Freedom of speech only guarantees your freedom to say, not to be heard, doesn't it?
That is true. That is true. So we still have to play nice with these big tech giants, right? So we're still, even with net neutrality, obviously, I totally agree with the fundamental principles of net neutrality. I need at least a foothold somewhere. But you're right, with these big companies who have monopolized things, and this is where I want to refer everyone back to Sherry Weiss, who did this wonderful series on antitrust laws not being enforced. Because they haven't been enforced, now I only have a few places to go with my little bit of ad dollars to try and get eyeballs on my content. That's kind of a problem. That is antithetical to the whole free market and free peaches, right?
Freeze. You freeze the peaches.
Freeze peaches. Yeah. Yeah.
It is.
It's like elephant shoes.
Right.
Right.
Right. But I mean, those advertising methods, you can always go back to the guerrilla advertising. Dave can speak to that. We got the cops called on us for some guerrilla advertising before.
Wait, what? There's a story there. What happened?
We were spray chalking sidewalks.
Oh, it's chalk though. It's chalk.
Yeah, apparently that's what I said, and apparently the local city did not agree with us that chalk is non-permanent and therefore wasn't a big deal.
Oh my goodness. Okay. All right.
I mean, you could go out and buy yourself a little plane too, right?
Right. But I mean, you go back to the guerrilla marketings and things like that, then you're spreading via word of mouth, then you're not, there's always another avenue. And just because you can't spend your money with the big corporations to do your advertising doesn't mean that you can't advertise.
Okay. So what you're saying is we just have to be a little more creative and maybe, Andy, we talked about selling you as a virtual dinner date. I think maybe that's the way we need to go. So
I don't think anybody could afford to take me to dinner. Virtual dinner. Virtual dinner. Yeah. Oh, so I have to pay for my own food. I don't think I can afford that.
Exactly. So, all right. So it sounds like this is actually a lot easier than what it's being made out to be. So Josh Hawley is just crying crocodile tears because he lost money. It's not really censorship or loss of freedom of speech. It's just, you're right. Just because you can speak doesn't mean that people need to listen to you or pay for it.
I mean, how many punks back in the day, and I'm talking out there to all yous, how many of you punks back in the day used to get, the little pamphlet zines or zines that somebody was printing off their home printer or going to Kinko's, and running off copies. Nothing stopping, Josh from writing his book and going to Kinko's and running off copies, right?
That's true. That is true. Yeah, and I gotta say, I love the whole concept of depends on how much you get to spend and how much you can do out there. And like the Bernie thing, I remember one of the best advertising campaigns was the very nice lady who was doing the bridges. We called her Bernie Bridges, the Bernie Bridges lady, and she would just go out on to the highway overpass with her Bernie message and reach people that way. So yeah, you're right. There are things that can be done. So now that we've solved this entire problem of free speech. Okay, what am I missing?
We still have to get our new FCC chair to actually revert what the previous one did about net neutrality, so that everything we've talked about stays like open and free, and opens up the ISPs so that there's no restrictions on hosting your own on your own, residential connection. That's the key, is ensuring that, you saw now that the net neutrality rules got repealed, and the next day everybody's like, oh, the internet's still here. Yeah, it wasn't about a quick turnaround like that. It's about that slow decline that the rules and the boiling the frog, right? Over time, it's only going to get more and more restrictive. Now is our chance to revert that with a new FCC chair in place, right? And remains to be seen if Biden's appointment is going to do that, right?
So back up a little bit and refresh those of us who have short-term memory loss because we're old. What happened with net neutrality, and what should we be doing now to restore it?
So back a few weeks ago, I think, I don't know. All time means nothing anymore now that COVID happened. You had Ajit Pai, who was appointed by President Trump at that time to be the chair of the FCC, and he was against the concept of net neutrality, which is ultimately that the ISPs cannot do anything to restrict or favor any particular piece of information coming down the pipeline. The internet service providers wanted to be able to kind of deal with internet as cable, where you pay for this tier and you get access to these sites, and then you pay for this tier and you get access to these sites. The other ones, you can get access to anything, but it'll be slower than those that pay for the premium super speed fast lane. Mm-hmm. But and so that happened, and now we have a chance to get rid of that with a new chair, because this is just a rule by the FCC. It's not a law; it's a rule by the FCC, right?
Okay, so Andy, not to get into your personal business, but you're kind of having a problem with that same thing right now, but you're in Canada.
Well, yeah, but I could always blame the cold.
Okay. All right. So we've all had the experience where you are sold from a vendor some super fast speed, if you will, but just pay the extra money. And then in the use of that, you find out that you're a fraction of it. Right. So.
Well, sure. That might just be a problem with technology as well. Right. Because where I live is a rural area, and there's not a lot of choices here, right? Because of, I've got 5 acres right in the middle of nowhere. So I was just close enough for a DSL connection to the local provider in the small town that's closest to me. Or if I could get line of sight on a tower, through the air, then I could get a much better connection that way. But now this corporate or this company that I'm with, they're expanding and they're trying to be able to provide what they said they would provide to their customers. The problem is that when the pandemic hit, the amount of internet traffic went up exponentially because of kids were distance learning at home, and people were working from home, and so normally through the day the traffic would be a certain amount. Well, that's got up 2 or 3 times, right? And so the pipes that I have access to, right, have to eventually be expanded to be able to keep up with that traffic, and that's basically the problem I'm having right now. So it's more a technological problem than it is a.
But wait a second, isn't that a public use issue? I mean, Mike, we talked about public and private, but just to get on, if the infrastructure isn't there, you're being left behind in so many different ways. So while it's not exactly free speech, it is an accessibility issue. And we have that here in the US too, with that last mile. And like where I live now, there are certain places that can get super fast internet, but others that where it's a desert, right? Well, literally. So in Andy's case, he was sold something and something else has occurred because of traffic. But yeah, so at what point is it the government's responsibility to make sure that everyone has equitable access?
I mean, it's almost as if we might have something in history that we can look to for this. And I mean, like, you know, the electrification of rural communities and stuff like that, that we saw through the history of the country. And we really need to start dealing with the internet in the same manner, where the internet is a public utility, where that connection, that fiber, we need fiber. And I know Dave's over there cheering. Yes, he said it. We need fiber everywhere in this country. We need absolutely 100%, because that's how we future-proof. Just like with the rural electrification, we need to make sure that everybody has access. It is a utility. You can't get through your life anymore without connection to the internet somehow. You can't even apply to McDonald's by walking in and filling out a job application. You have to go to the McDonald's website to fill out a job application. That's the bigger issue there.
Now, I want to just push back on that and say that's not the same thing as your doctor telling you need fiber to stay regular.
Right.
Totally different.
They'll both can result in ropey things. Anyway.
Okay, all right.
Or faster internet.
So I just want to get to some of the comments. First, Cindy, she said this is our first time seeing DLF, and it's very interesting. Thank you, Cindy. You're catching us on a very casual Friday, but thank you for joining us. And if you have any comments or you want to weigh into the conversation, please feel free to. And then, of course, Dave did jump in with, for those who are not aware, Dave is an advocate for community-owned fiber. So if you want to look at a really good example of where this works and works for the people, Chattanooga, Tennessee has some of the fastest speeds, and it's community-owned. So they're not paying a big service provider for their nets. They actually own it, and then they just contract with somebody to maintain it. It works really well. So Dave has been a long time advocate of community-owned fiber, and Dave says the traffic issues wouldn't have been an issue with fiber optics or even cable, and wireless is a shared technology. More people that use it, the less available bandwidth there is. So, and of course, fiber in your diet is still important. Thank you, Dave.
we could get into to RF and time slicing and all that other stuff and how that plays into Andy's problem. But I think that nobody but me and Dave would probably be interested in that conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I want to bring it full circle now. Here's something that's interesting, an interesting point. On the Wall Street thing, Redditors were trying to rally around Nokia. Nokia is the leader in 5G. So are Redditors openly trying to give us all gay frogs and cancer with the 5G, Mike?
I believe 100% that the 5G waves do not cause, in fact, the science backs me up, but for the memes, I will say that they are putting chemicals in the water that are turning the frogs gay.
There you go. So
why is it only frogs? That's what I want to know. Why just frogs?
Because a certain individual who shall not be named doesn't understand that sometimes frogs will swap sexes. Because he did not watch Jurassic Park.
Or pay attention in high school.
Right. Well, or Mutual of Omaha, who I grew up with. And what was it, every Sunday night at the Mutual of Omaha Animal Hour. So, yeah, okay. So 5G does not turn the frogs gay. You don't need a tinfoil hat. The science is behind it. And this is part of where the rally has been happening.
Well, 5G only affects those who believe in a flat Earth, because the curvature of the Earth prevents the 5G waves from hitting you. But if it's a flat Earth, then it hits you right in the head.
Okay, all right.
Well,
totally makes sense.
I'm only 5'7", so I can be.
Right, not a problem. Flat Earth, round, doesn't matter to Andy.
Doesn't hit me.
Awesome, that works. So, all right. So now that we have come full circle and solved all of this, way to go, guys.
Yeah.
Let's.
We did it, Reddit.
Yeah. So my parting shout out is to everybody, Reddit or wherever you are, the Canadian Cavalry who came through, New Zealand, Australia. Thank you so much, and hold the line. So that's all I got. Mike, any parting words of wisdom?
If I may, I just, because I'm sure that Dave has put a link down in there, but I'm going to go ahead and say it if you don't mind. If you're in the McHenry County area, look us up, Internet Freedom for McHenry County, because we are trying to do that fiber thing, and we need your help.
Awesome. All right, Andy, take us out. What do you got?
Oh, just that I just wanted to, on that fiber thing, I tried taking my modem and putting it in a box of bran flakes, and it didn't help. I really, you can't mix the two.
Oh my God.
So, anyways, I think this was a great show. I thank you so much, Mike, for coming on. It's always...
Thanks for having me.
It's always very informative and informal at the same time. With us, Carrie and I, with our intact globes, and you with your exploding globe, which is kind of a little bit of a different look, but that's fine. So
the background actually is from a video game. It's the elusive man who is an information broker.
Oh, so it all comes full circle. Well, there you go. It's all good. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today, and we will be back on Monday. If everything works out, we survive the weekend, and enjoy your weekend, and we will see you soon. Take care.
We bout that, we in the zone, we out here, spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hair of the dog, we keeping it G.